Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of
Ghetto.
My name is Hans,
I'm Edward.
and we are your hosts for now and forevermore.
Or until one of us becomes a cult sensation thanks to glowing reviews. Yeah.
That is actually such a lovely way of introducing this episode because I was thinking far more along the lines of world current events, and I'm not even going to say what I was going to say.
No, I get you.
But yes, welcome to Ghetto episode 83. Today we are going to be tackling the idea of reviews, whether or not they are still worth it in the current climate, what you should really be looking out for when reading reviews, and a little bit more into what goes on behind the scenes for people who actually do the reviews, like myself and Edward.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting topic because we are so used to doing it that we often don't realize that people who are not in the industry as a journalist, regardless of which industry it is, but generally in entertainment media industry, we're so used to getting pre-release code or access to content before it becomes available, for which we review it because we have the journalistic ability and expertise to critique a piece of media in a way that is fair, should be unbiased, and offers an idea of what viewers or gamers or whatever the piece of media is, whoever consumes it, should expect from it. Yeah. And generally, reviews are well received. A lot of the times people wonder about certain things. Like, for example, do you want to eat at this restaurant? Then, you may look at a professional who critiques the reviews at the place, or you might look at community reviews. That is something else that we want to actually touch upon within this episode. Hey, Ed?
Yeah, no, it's...
I'm just launching off here with what it is we're going to be doing. Okay.
No, I'm just thinking about your restaurant reference. And I actually think that's a very good thing that we can constantly go back to because it has all the things.
It has everything, yes.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are listening, perhaps you might not know what a review is, right? Or rather, maybe your perception of what a review is meant to be has been skewed. Now, according to the typical definition of what a review is, it is meant to be a critical assessment of something, generally media related, but it doesn't have to be, right? Like we've just mentioned that there's food, there's products, so it is a critical assessment of something that gives the end user an idea of whether or not this product, form of entertainment, food, whatever it may be, is worth your time, and as I say on YouTube, your moolah. So, it's interesting because I don't know that is what reviews are meant to be. But I've seen a lot today, and Edward can attest to this as well, is because we're in this industry, and we have been for over a decade, if not longer, we have seen a lot of journalistic integrity sort of go out the window for a lot of review content, which in its own way is rather sad. And I also want to touch upon that while we speak about reviews in general. So now that we have the definition out of the way, Ed, what would you like to speak about first? What comes to your mind when I speak to you about what the general term of review is versus what a review might be considered as today?
The big thing is that everyone thinks they can be a reviewer. And while that is partially true, I believe that you still need, or rather, let me put it this way. While it's true that you can review anything, no matter who you are, what you are, where you are, I still think that bias is a big thing, and we'll speak about bias in a bit. But
okay, let's unpack this slowly, right?
Okay.
The reason why I say this is because I think we need to give a very nuanced breakdown of this, because there's actually so much to unpack. The last thing that I want to do is have our listeners jumping back and forth the whole time.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start off with what we've said before about reviews. They're meant to be a critical assessment of something. Now, Edward has brought up an excellent point. Actually, several excellent points. The first of which has to do with bias within reviews. Now, I have an academic background. And as a result, throughout my journalistic career, I have ensured that I took what I learned as an academic, as a research academic, and implemented it within whatever it is that I had to do within my journalistic job.
Yeah.
And as a result, as much as possible, I try to be as unbiased as is humanly possible. Now, that in itself is a very difficult thing to do. Bias is part of human nature. Even if you don't even think about it, in your everyday life, people gravitate to certain things. It might be a preference for a certain toothpaste, or it could be a certain tomato sauce. These are things people don't necessarily think about, yet the biases are already there. They're already formed. Yeah. So every single review, no matter who it's done by, has bias. Now, this interestingly enough, also links to what Edward said about expertise. So the reason why you would want an expert in a field to review a particular product or topic is because their bias is more nuanced than someone who doesn't have the expertise. And what I mean by nuance is that they have the knowledge in the background to look at something, even with bias, but objectively.
Yeah.
I know it's interesting to say you like to look at something objectively with bias it sounds counterintuitive, but someone who has expertise in the field can pull apart certain biases. It. Yes. Thank you. That's the word.
Yeah, see, the thing is, that's the thing. It's all about critique. At the end of the day, I believe, especially with biases and the people that you follow for review, it's not so much about the expertise, but so much as your flavor, your voice. At the end of the day, it's good to get everyone's opinion. Okay, a good analysis.
Okay, hold on. So you're okay. We've already mentioned we want to speak about community. Okay.
Yeah.
But before we get there, let's fully unpack the single voices that are meant to be experts in their fields, which Edward has already beautifully laid out just a moment ago. And so he mentioned to me now that, we obviously follow a lot of industry people. And in so doing, we, internationally, locally, doesn't matter from where. And in so doing, we are, we have access to a lot of differing opinions. And I suppose that's one of the wonderful things about reviews is that everyone has something different to say.
Yeah.
Within reason. And I want to get back to that because this all links to community and bias, but we'll eventually get to that. So for an individual, as Edward has said, generally it's best to seek out what is considered an expert in the field. They don't have to be an expert. It's just the terminology we're using right now to, unpack and discuss what it means to be a critic or a reviewer.
Yes, someone knowledgeable.
Yes. So, for example, you'd have people who like cars, right? They would then look towards what used to be Top Gear, which I think is now something else now, right? But
it's still Top Gear as well. Yeah.
But that's a great example of the common layman looking towards experts in their fields for opinions on something that they're interested in. Yeah. So that is generally how the entire industry works. Edward and I, for example, we are tech and video game reviewers But we also do movies and entertainment. So I guess it's technically, we're entertainment reviewers with bits of technology on the side. As a result, in the fields that we do, which are primarily video games and tech, we are considered experts in those fields.
Yeah.
Why? Because we've been doing it for over a decade. We have, learned backgrounds in these topics. And because we've had so much privileged experience from, companies who choose to support us, we have had access to far more products and games than the average person. And as a result of that, we technically have more expertise. It's like looking at somebody who, take rugby, for example. You may not play rugby, or maybe once upon a time you did. So you know the game, you enjoy the game, and you tune in whenever there's a rugby game playing.
Yeah.
Now, the people who are speaking about rugby are generally former players, and not just any players, former prestigious players. And this is because you as the viewer feel that that person is knowledgeable about what they're talking about, because not only have they played the game, but they have great experience in the game. Therefore, they must be knowledgeable on what they're speaking about.
Exactly.
Yes. So that is where, it becomes quite important to, when you're consuming a review, to understand or determine where this reviewer is coming from and how experienced the reviewer is. Now, this is not to shoot down people who have no experience in the field, right? You might be somebody who thoroughly enjoys video games and you want to break into the field of becoming a video games journalist. Mm-hmm. You feel because you play video games, you have a great footing. But in that sense, yes, that is partially true, but there is far more to critiquing a video game versus just speaking about a video game. And that is something I would like to very much talk about once we get to the community element of reviews.
Yeah, the Yelp elements, basically.
Well, I mean, not necessarily Yelp, right? Like, community is special. It's what I like about it is every opinion is valid, right? Yeah. Somebody who has an expertise in a field, generally speaking, their opinion should be regarded higher than somebody who doesn't. However, if the community as a whole says differently to what the critic is saying, that is now a whole different discussion.
Yeah, there must be some merit to it. Like, obviously, when you look at community, you get the outliers. You get the people that basically review bomb something because they just hate it for whatever reason. And then you get people who love something because they love it for whatever reason. And then you get the people who look at things objectively, as a reviewer would and
should.
But I've seen this before, and I've seen this especially with games like The Last of Us 2 and Cyberpunk, where the critique side of things, the knowledgeable, well-established reviewers, and the Rotten Tomatoes side, the
public
community
opinion
side, would differ completely. And there is something beautiful about that, especially when you get a high-profile thing releasing, like a movie or a game, or maybe even a restaurant, because I've seen this for Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen restaurants, where the critics will either pan and hate on something, and the community will love it.
Absolutely love it.
Then you have to ask yourself, like, why? Why is this? And I don't know. It kind of leads back to the fact that everyone's opinion is valid.
I actually have an opinion on that. I have an opinion on that.
Okay.
From a lot of what I've seen in terms of when there are large discrepancies between what a critic has to say, and generally when a critic is negative, versus when a critic is overly positive, right? When a critic is overly negative about something, and you compare it to community reviews, and the community is actually overwhelmingly positive, to me, that is a sign of hubris. And hubris on the part of the critique. the reviewer. I say this because we have experience in the field, so we can speak from personal experience. Okay.
Yeah.
Although Edward and I do our very best to not be influenced in that direction, I firmly believe that amongst a lot of the people that we're surrounded by, we do a much better job than many other people do. And by that, I mean, we have a very strict code of ethics, and we follow it. And one of those things is that we refuse to be paid for or receive something in lieu of a review. We just feel that that is unethical. Sorry. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are a lot of people in our industry who don't feel the same way. They feel that because a review takes so much time and so much effort, that they should be compensated for it. And Edward and I, because I'm speaking for both of us, I know you agree with me, we vehemently disagree with that, because where then do you draw the line in terms of the bias for the product that you're reviewing? You know, because a lot of the times people who are getting something for a review, generally speaking, would speak more favorably about the product or the service or the movie, whatever it is, than somebody who used their own money for it. Now, that again is another debatable aspect of the whole thing, because in today's day and age, specifically when it comes to digital media, that is generally consumed once off. So for us, for example, to review a game, we have to get the game. Now, because of COVID and the pandemic, things have changed. We no longer receive physical code, which sometimes used to be sent back. Now we receive digital code. So, you know, in that sense, unfortunately, you have to accept the product in order to review it. Yeah. However, with that said, at least from Edward and I's perspective, what we do is we often redeem codes to a third-party account. And then, you know, like let's say if that account is linked to me, Edward would review the game instead. Just as an example. So then that way we try and eliminate bias. Anyway, I'm going a little bit off topic there. So what I mean about the whole hubris thing when it comes to reviews is that these people who feel that they've reached the pinnacles of their careers, maybe not even reach the pinnacle. They just feel that they're such an expert in the field that their opinion is the be-all and end-all, and it doesn't matter what the community thinks. That, to me, is a huge problem. Because, in a way, privilege really gets in the way of a lot of things. So when you have access to people behind the scenes, which normal people don't have, you already have an edge. You know, you already have an in. You already start knowing more about the product that you want to review or that you're going to review. You have it weeks or months or days before the rest of the public as well. Then with that privilege, to an extent, you know, they feel that, not that they're better than, but, you know, it gets to that point of, you know, I am a seasoned reviewer. My opinion means this. Yours doesn't mean as much. And that is just wholly untrue. So as we mentioned before, when we were unpacking what it means to be a critic, generally speaking, you would want to hear the opinion of somebody who's knowledgeable in the field, who has a lot of experience, and then is able to somewhat objectively, with as limiting bias as possible, give you an opinion on something. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, everyone, as Edward was saying, has an opinion and is able to share an opinion. And as a result, there is a lot of community feedback. Yeah. So now when we look at something like a reviewer who, let's say, panned a film, but the general public are like, no, that film was incredible. That's where you have to look at it and you have to be like, okay, but let's read the reviews and see why they panned it. What was their rationale? If it was something along the lines of, oh, I'm sick and tired of superhero movies, well, that is not a good enough rationale. Because now you're not critiquing the film you watched, you're critiquing the genre. And that's not fair to the film. That's just a rough example, right? Of sometimes why you get differences between the audience and, critics. Now, with that in mind, one of the best parts of community-driven feedback is a lot of the times actually, I want to the one, the most recent one that comes to mind is Elden Ring, to me.
Okay.
All right, it's come out, glowing reviews across the board. Everyone's giving it almost 10 out of 10, perfect scores, so on and so forth. I am someone who doesn't enjoy the Souls-like genre. All right. Now, I've always been interested in it, but I've just never been able to get into it. This is the exact opposite to you, Edward. Hey.
I love it. I love everything Soulsborne. From Demon's. Okay, to be fair, Demon's Souls is the weakest link, but I digress. From Dark Souls to Bloodborne to Sekiro, I love them all.
Right. So now, when all the reviews came out and they were all glowing, I, in my naivete, was like, okay, this is interesting. They're all loving it. Maybe it's different. Maybe it's not a Souls-like in the way that everybody once thought. Because, there were a lot of critical reviews that were talking about the open world and how much more accessible it is as a Souls-like game. And so I decided to try it. And was I disappointed? But bear in mind, I am not somebody who really already doesn't enjoy the genre, right?
Yeah.
So I believe the hype that it was different to what it was, but if I had read closely enough, I would have seen that every single review says it's a Souls-like title, regardless of the accessibility, regardless of the differences in this title versus previous Souls-like. So therefore, inherently, if I don't enjoy the Souls-like genre, I'm not going to enjoy this new Souls-like title.
Probably not. Yeah. To be fair, well, okay, I'm going to digress again, but there's always that one title that you like in a genre that you generally don't. Such as, for instance, let's say Bloodborne. For some reason, and I don't know why this is, but I've noticed an uptick in people who love Bloodborne just because it's Bloodborne and not because it's a Soul-like. And I think
that's interesting.
It could come down to stuff like, I wouldn't say gameplay because it's a Souls-like. It's same gameplay. But maybe theme and design. And that's why you try to go into Elden Ring, because of the open world.
You're actually spot on. It wasn't just the open world. It was also the fact that George R.R. Martin was attached. So I was then immediately curious about the narrative and the setting. Yeah. And of course, I had seen imagery of it, and it looked very Lord of the Rings. It looked very beautiful.
Yeah, it does.
However, it's is a Souls game through and through.
At the end of the day, it's a Souls game. I think that might skew some reviews as well. Now I've never thought about that.
But you see, that is an interesting. So the whole reason why I want to bring this up, right, is because it has received glowing reviews across the board. All right. Now, in terms of the two of us, Edward is going to be reviewing the game. This was a decision that was made a while ago, long before I even had an interest in the title. Edward previously told me, it was years ago already, because this game's been in development for years, that he was interested in it. So I was like, okay, should the opportunity arise, you will get to review the title. Now, what's interesting about that is just in this week, Edward and I have been talking about why don't I review the title? Because I don't do Souls-like. So what would someone who doesn't generally enjoy Souls-like games actually say about the Souls-like experience with Elden Ring? Would it be as glowing as the rest of the reviewers who have all played previous Souls-like titles, versus somebody who hasn't? Now, this now leads to where it is very important to know about the reviewer whose reviews you are reading. And the reason why this is important is because, as we mentioned at the very start of this episode, reviewers have skills and specialities and knowledge within certain fields within what they do. Yeah. So, as a great example between Edward and myself, Edward is the person who is most familiar with Souls-like titles. Therefore, he is the better option between the two of us to review a Souls-like game, because he has the experience and the knowledge to pull back on previous experiences within the Souls-like genre, which I don't have. Now, that's not to say that if I had to write the review, that it would be less than, because as a seasoned video games journalist, I can pull from other resources. Like I would then compare it perhaps to action adventure and RPGs and MMOs, that sort of a thing. However, generally speaking, when it comes to reviews for video games and content, we are often put under severe time constraints and pressure.
Yeah.
So although it would be fun to play around with the idea of getting somebody who is not knowledgeable about something to review a particular subject, it is generally far better to give the topic to somebody who is already experienced in the field. And that is just across the board for reviews. It doesn't matter where you look. If you go and read a movie review, and let's say somebody gave the new Batman film a glowing review, and you go and look up at what else this reviewer has produced, you will see he probably does superhero action movies. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows, right? So, I simply bring that up because it's then important to understand that when looking at review scores, percentages, and verdicts, to always look at it with a little bit of grain of salt.
Yeah, a tiny bit.
Because, as we've said, generally speaking, people who've reviewed those titles have expertise in the genres or the fields. So if they are then giving Elden Ring, in this great example, a solid review, that's because they are experts in the fields of Souls-like games. Now, of course, that's not a blanket term. It's not that everybody who's reviewed this game and given it a high score is somebody who's enjoyed Souls-likes. I'm just trying to give a generalized example of how the industry often will work.
Yeah.
And why, coming back to your earlier point, why community input is so important. So in this example that I'm talking about now, where I was led to believe something different about Elden Ring, I then looked at the community and actually received a very different outlook. Yes, scores are still high. The difference, though, is that there were a lot of people who didn't enjoy Souls-like games who were then commenting and saying, this is a Souls-like game.
Exactly. That's the other point I want to make, that if you go look at all these experts in the field, and you compare their newest review to some of their oldest stuff, it's important to note that how these critiques review their games, especially the games that they like. For instance, a good example again is Elden Ring. If you get a glowing review about Elden Ring and you look at the community feedback and you compare the two and there's a discrepancy, go back to this reviewer and see his previous critique. If they gave the same critique to Bloodborne, to Sekiro, and to Dark Souls and Demon Souls, it's easy to see that is this even reviewed in an, or at least attempted to review in an unbiased light, or is it just fanboyism through and through? That's the other thing we should look at.
So you bring up an excellent point. So where I was trying to make the argument whereby you would have an expert in something, you would prefer that expert to do that. You are right about the bias, all right? It would then therefore, so take you, right? Let's use us. We're not going to have to pinpoint anybody else.
Gladly.
You yourself have just said you love Souls-like titles. Now, you see, there's a positive and negative to this, all right?
Yeah.
The positive is you are familiar with Souls-like titles. So in my personal opinion, you would be the better person of the two of us to critique a Souls-like title. Because you already know what Souls-like titles are like. So you could therefore be like, okay, well, compared to Bloodborne, it's like this. Compared to Dark Souls, it's like this. Or Elden Ring is basically just Bloodborne skinned with a Lord of the Rings theme, whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously the positive to it. And then I suppose, on the other end of the coin, the other side of the coin, is because you have such a love for Souls-like games, you may look over certain things without realizing it. Certain problems that exist that somebody who doesn't enjoy the Souls-like genre. So he has a great example in my opinion. Edward's knowledge about these Souls-like games implies that when you play a Souls-like game, you know nothing. They tell you nothing. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
I started playing the game and I was like, what the hell is going on? Why am I not being told what to do? Where do I go? What's happening? I don't know what to do. And I was like, who puts this together? How lazy are these devs,
Old Michael's Aki and laziness. The thing is, anyone who's played a Souls-like game before would know that the game, there's zero hand-holding. The most story ever in a Souls-like game was Sekiro. It had a through line, an actual story that progresses throughout the game, whereas all the others just like, you're there, and then maybe an hour in you'll be like, oh, I need to go to the towers to ring the bells, and then when you do, you're like, oh, I need to go fight that boss to become the new lord or the new king or whatever. That's not a story, is it?
No.
And a valid criticism of Elden Ring so far, I'll give you my 10 hours in preview, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that the story is a lot more story, but you have to look for it. Whereas anyone who's never played a Souls-like game before would not know to do this.
So drawing it back to what we said, right? The positives and the negatives of this situation is, sure, my perspective on this might be an enjoyable read because I don't know what the F is going on, and
like, thank you for this guguide.
Yes, exactly. So because of the fact that these two things often intercede, right? The fact that it's almost impossible to realistically, as human beings, to review something without bias. You try as hard as possible, as much as possible, but it's very difficult to. And when we look at what we've just spoken about now, how yes, reading my opinion would be interesting, it probably would be entertaining, but would it be fair to the subject material? You see? So that's something else that is as a reviewer you have to be cognizant of. So perhaps to an extent, yes, it would be fair, because what does somebody who doesn't enjoy that genre actually think? Now, most of us already know they wouldn't play it because they don't enjoy it, so whatever the case is. But then again, at the same time, I've seen a lot of people who never liked Souls-like titles really get into it and enjoy it. And I want that. So I haven't given up on Elden Ring, for those of you who are listening. I will, maybe in a couple of weeks from now, if I've played enough, I might come back and be like, you know what, I understand the reviews, they're amazing, I get it. But right now, as somebody who is used to being spoon-fed narrative, I am not enjoying the experience.
I will say this. A lot of the enjoyment, especially for new players, out of the Soulsborne games, come from the challenge of beating the bosses and nothing else. I've seen, and I love reading and watching people who has no experience in these games.
Yes.
Because to me, I would give anything to be that guy again. to find the franchise for the first time. And interesting fact, sorry, I'm going to derail, but I want to mention this. My original love for Dark Souls came from not even playing the game. It came from all the lore videos, because as you find things in the game, you read the tidbits of information they give on the piece of equipment. There's no story in Dark Souls 1. It has zero story. But if you read the tidbits, you can put things together and you can theory craft.
Okay.
And that's what got into it.
Now that, I want people who are listening to this episode to go back 2 episodes and listen to our discussion on narrative.
Yes. That's
because
exactly it.
I almost dove back into it now and started talking to you about it again. But I realized rather, if you are listening to
Keep it back.
Edward and I did a wonderful discussion about narrative and law and how important they
Yes.
are. And I'm quite certain it's a topic we'll probably revisit again in a future episode.
Oh,
Now,
for sure. Yeah.
reining back this episode back a little bit, because we don't want it to be a critique of Elden Ring the entire time, even though it's what's on the mind, it's what's happening right now. So you know, it's easy to talk about. Something else I think that is worth mentioning is how difficult this industry is, and how, you know, if you find a voice that you enjoy listening to or reading their opinion, that you should support them. Even if it's small, like sharing the work, like, oh, I really enjoyed this review. This was great. Or even if you didn't enjoy the opinion. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but how else is a reviewer meant to improve if they can't have good discourse with the community at large?
Exactly.
All right. Now, I bring this up because I do want to touch a little bit on public relations and what it's like being a professional journalist within the field. It doesn't matter what you do, whether it's movies, games, tech, whatever the case is. And how it can be quite stressful, as I mentioned before, because of embargoes. And the reason why I want to mention that is because I have had conflicting feelings about reviews and review periods and the final assessment before publication. And what I mean by that in particular is, for example, you know, sometimes you'll get a game which needs a minimum of 100 hours. You know, all open world games are massive. They have lots to do and lots to see. But then the publisher will give you 3 days. And you're meant to give up all 3 days of your life to try and push through 100 hours of story in order to get the review done by embargo. Now, that is another whole discussion of should reviewers be susceptible to crunch? You know, should they do that in order to give the public what they want? I would say no. I would say publishers should give reviewers more time. That's my personal opinion on the situation. Because, or rather, well, that's one of them. Secondly, as an editor, and Edward will attest to this, I very rarely will ask him to push through to an embargo date because it's not fair. It doesn't do the reviewer justice and it doesn't do the game justice either. All right? So there have been times in the past where we've been like, okay, we'll push the review out at a later stage, which is from the grand scale and looking at everything as a whole is not great for whatever your publication is, whether it's a YouTube channel or a written thing or whatever, because of the way the news cycle works, which is why we don't really do news anymore in Vamers. We just don't enjoy it. With that said, when you start building a community of people enjoying your writing and knowing what you are a specialist in, like take Edward, for example, who's excellent in true to life simulations, you know, like the farming simulator, car simulators. He also is like for Souls-likes games. Well, actually, Edward does most of the things, but for the most part, those are his specialities, and that is what he's most, well, not good at, but that is what he's most known for. Whereas conversely, for myself, I'm action adventure, RTSs, which is a bit different again, and so on and so forth. And what we have found over the last decade is how nice it is when you do have communities that follow you, know you for what you're good at, or know for what you're interested in, and are able to critique properly because you have the experience in it, and then the feedback you get from those people. And what I'm trying to get by that is it's important for you as the consumer to not just take one or several reviews at face value. Always do exactly what Edward has said. Look into the review, look into the reviewer, see what else they've done. Is their opinion on this one thing true? Or is there maybe a little bit more bias than you would care for? And could it be paid for? Okay? Now, generally speaking, disclosure is meant to be a part of the industry. Unfortunately, we know of many people who just don't. So it is quite important to, when you are consuming a review, that review states where the product came from, or the code came from, or how they had access to the media. It is very important to know, because the last thing you want is someone whose opinion has been swayed by free product or monetary gain. That I actually think is probably a good discussion for another day, actually, because we can say quite a lot about that.
Discussion.
Yeah. So essentially, we've spoken a lot about reviews now. We've spoken about what they are, how they work, the differences between community and what we would say professional. Edward, is there anything else that you'd like to go back on, to touch upon, or to talk about now before we seemingly end off the episode?
That's the thing. No, I think we covered most of it.
I mean, perhaps look, I would love to know what the audience thinks. What do you think about what we've said about reviews? As people who do them for professionally, do you agree with our opinion? Do you not agree with our opinion? What do you think? Because at the end of the day, as I said, we also want to learn and grow. We also want to become better than what we may have done in the past. And the only way to do that is when we ourselves are critiqued by the masses,
Exactly.
but constructively, please.
I mean,
I've had my fair share of horrible YouTube comments, okay? But with that said, I've had far more positive comments. So I am developing a thick skin, which is not something I ever thought that I would, but I understand now, that maybe, again, another topic for another day, but I understand now what it is to brush off the trolls and the horrible people.
You kind of need to. That's an entirely different.
It's a different thing. Yeah. So ultimately, I think what Edward and I are trying to relay, and I know I've been speaking most of the time in this, what is meant to be a discussion, is that pay attention to reviews, who the reviewer is, what the reviewer has done, and then also look at public opinion. In other words, you should very rarely look at one review and think that that's it.
Yeah.
Rather be a little bit more open to reading differing opinions from a variety of different people, and then make up your mind on whether or not you think this movie is worth watching, this game is worth playing, this book should be read, or this restaurant should be eaten at.
See, the best advice I can give in that regard is to find reviewers that you like, and whose writing that you like, and whose flavor that you like.
Yes.
But to make sure that they do differ in opinion. Get someone who loves eating spaghetti, and get someone who loves eating pasta, and make sure that the one doesn't necessarily love pasta as well. Just have them find more than one. That's the point.
That's exactly it. Always read more than one opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no number. It's not like read 3 opinions and then be done with it. It's like find somebody that you can relate with, somebody whose voice you feel is most similar to yours, if at all possible, right? If at all possible. Because generally speaking, if you can do that, it means that you find something relatable with that person. And if you find something relatable, chances are good that their opinion will be in line with yours. Not always, but majority of the time.
Yeah. And when it's not, though, that's
also fine.
Yeah. You should be like, oh, why? Instead of, oh, I hate this now, I'm never going to read them again.
Yeah. Actually, I've done that before. Look, okay, there was something else. There was something else that I wanted to expand upon, but I suppose we've far gone past that now. It was basically just along the lines of the experience of reviewers, and how I've seen a lot of newer people pop up, which is great. I'm all for industries growing. But the thing to be careful about somebody who's been doing it for a very short period of time is that, generally speaking, they want to impress. So it's the possibility of their voice being skewed towards the better end of the spectrum exists. And then secondly, how much experience do they really have in what it is that they're doing? So yeah. when all else fails, resort to the community. I have found on numerous occasions, actually, interesting enough, I just want to mention this quick, is that I have often seen, as you said, and more so in movies, right? Discrepancies between what a critic has to say versus what the audience has to say. Yeah. And I have found that a lot of the times, especially for movie viewing, I lean towards the critic. Now, I don't know if that's because I am a critic myself. So therefore, Edward will also attest to this, is that when we play or watch or read or enjoy something, because we do this professionally and have been doing it for over a decade, it is very difficult to do anything without critiquing it on some level. Yep. Now, I know that probably sounds terrible.
It takes the fun out of the game in a way.
The thing is that by default, humans do that by default. Everybody critiques something. You take a sip of your coffee and it's good. Oh, it's not so good. Oh, I shouldn't have added that. Everyone's always looking at something in a certain way to see whether they can be improved or if it shouldn't be improved and so on and so forth. Yes. So the difference, though, is that when you do it professionally, you do it all the time, it's very difficult to snap out of that. And therefore, even if you're looking at something for enjoyment, chances are you will enjoy it, but at the same time, you're critiquing it. So I've found for me, and I've had this with Edward, weirdly enough, this discussion, is that I don't enjoy like ham-fisted action movies. I just can't.
Yeah, like one-off, one and done.
I say Fast and Furious. That's one of the best ones that comes to mind, right? Like I can't do that. I look at that and I just look at everything wrong with it, from the narrative to the acting to the,
It's very hammy.
Yes. But again, maybe that's just preference. I don't know. And I am now digressing and just randomly talking about things. But Ed, anything else to add?
No, that was a good
point.
It was ended on a ham-fisted.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 83. Thank you very much for those of you who do listen. We hope you have been enjoying our fairly recent content. We have sort of changed gears and we are thoroughly enjoying what we're doing far more than what we did before. And we hope that translates into you as our audience. And as always, if you enjoyed, please do like, subscribe, and share. It always helps. And until the next episode, from Edward and myself, peace out.
Bye.